episode 19 of the Rising Phoenix podcast. Today, we're thrilled to bring you a conversation with Elon University and track and field alum Madison George. As an All-CAA Pole Vaulter and Honor Scholar, Madison soared on and off the field, designing the first ever women's pole vaulting shoes through an interdisciplinary research project. Now she's taking her innovation to new heights as a PhD student in bioengineering at Stanford University. Join us as we dive into Madison's incredible journey from her days at Elon to her trailblazing work at Stanford. We hope you enjoy. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Rising Phoenix podcast. I'm Chase Strasser, and I'm very excited about today's episode. I'm joined by Elon, women's track and field alum, now working towards her PhD at Stanford, Madison George. Welcome to the show, Madison.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
No problem. Let's start at the beginning. You're originally from Fountain Hills, Arizona. How does that necessarily lead to you becoming a pole vaulter at Elon University?
That's a great question. So I have always been an athlete my entire life. I've played around with a lot of things. My foundations were in gymnastics. I was a gymnast for quite a while. And at some point, in freshman year of high school, I tried out for the track and field team because I wanted to sprint. I wanted to long jump, just have fun outside. And I let it slip to my coach at the time during tryouts that I had been a gymnast. And he kind of just gave me the look. And he sent me over to the pole vault coach, and I was like, no, I don't want to be here. This looks dangerous. I'm not about that. I've done the gymnastics thing. I've done the injuries. But naturally, I fell in love with it the first day. You just get to fly. You get to use a pole and you get to fly. What else do you want? And yeah, so that year I competed and I progressed throughout the year as you do. And then eventually I started going to summer camps and then found my way to a club coach who really raised me as an athlete and as a coach. And then I started to, see something here that could be taken further. And yeah, throughout high school, I got all the way to 13 feet by the end of my senior year. And that was the Division III women's, girls high school record for Arizona, which was not bad. And, as I was touring colleges throughout like junior and senior year, I'm an engineer at heart. So everything was just like, I was weighing pros and cons of every school. And Elon was my last official visit. So you're allowed to have 5 official visits. But after I had, toured through all these other schools, I had a pros and cons list. Like, I like this, I don't like this, But when I went to Elon, the coach picked me up from the airport, handed me to a vaulter on the team, said, see ya. And I didn't see him again until 2 days later when he picked me up to go back to the airport. And I thought that spoke wonders about his trust in the team and just the environment. And he knew that they were going to take care of me and that I was going to be just fine. And he wanted me to see the actual student life, whereas other official visits, like they're very structured. You have meetings and you have to see all these people, and then your coach is bringing you to and from, and then also kind of like treating you like a king, the way that you're not ever going to be treated again. So I thought that was very special. And when I came home from Elon, I thought I could live there. And that was like the only thought really going through my brain. And I knew that I wanted to compete. So, I was able to narrow down my college options because I wanted to compete in pole vault. So I wanted D1 pole vaulting, which is, it narrows it down a little bit. And I also hated Arizona and I wanted to be as far away from Arizona as possible. All the schools I applied to, except for one, were all on the East Coast. And I applied to a lot of schools. Um, I wanted to be as far away as possible. So that's how I came about Elon, and it was probably the best decision I've ever made. I had the most amazing time at Elon. I had so much support, and I was really built at Elon, and professors and other support resources were so narrowed in on me as a student and as a human, especially being in a new up and rising engineering program that got accredited while I was there, which is a little risky, but it's going to get accredited, so it's okay. But there were, I think, including me, 13 people in my cohort graduating with an engineering bachelor's across all concentrations, which is pretty special. There were about half of that amount of professors. So it was a pretty good student faculty ratio. And then getting the new building, I remember having the entire building to myself when I would get there at 8 a.m. in the morning because there were no early morning classes in that building yet. And I was the first one to use some of the really cool equipment, the Stratasys 3D printer. The first project on that was a prototype of a shoe that I was making for women's pole vaulting. So that was very exciting. I can go on forever to speak wonders about Elon.
That's awesome. I That leads to my next question, where was
Mhm.
there any pressure you feel like being one of those 13 students and in the process of getting accredited? And I'm not sure where the timeline lines up, but were you ever, the innovation quad was brand new as well. How was all that?
Yeah, I didn't feel pressure. I just felt special. And just being able to walk in on my professors, like knock on their office door and say help, and they would help. It's not something you find everywhere. Like I can't do that really now at Stanford. But that was very special, and having a very tight-knit little cohort that's going through it with you was also very special. I mean, it's a little bit, is the word monotonous, that there are only 13 of us. So I was in the same classroom as these same like 12 other people all throughout the 4 years. So it was like the same group for a while. But I also had a minor in exercise science, which allowed me to branch out a little bit. But our curriculums were pretty close. And I concentrated in biomedical engineering, which basically means I took biomechanics and biophysics. But for the majority of our classes, we're in the same classes. And also because the engineering program was new and the curriculum was new and there were only a limited amount of professors. Every class was offered every other spring or every other fall, which made it very difficult for scheduling. And especially being an athlete, my classes were as they were, and that was the only way that they would be. So every single semester, I'm on the quarter system now. Every single semester, I would at some point have to practice by myself because I couldn't make it to a specific practice. There was one point when even my coach couldn't be there the only time of the day that I was able to work out. So I would do the sprint workout and lifting workout all on my own. And he would have to be there for my vaulting practices because you can't do that alone. But that became a little bit lonely, especially because that was after COVID too. And I was like, come on, we just got out of this. And now, now I still can't practice with the team. So that was a little bit difficult. But that's not something that you can really do anything about. And it's not like you can add 10 more professors. It was still up and rising, but it was so special because there were these times when I would have conflicts with my schedule because that's just the way the classes were. And a couple times, a professor offered to have me as an independent study, and they would teach it to me on their like own time, which was extremely special. And they didn't even bat an eye about it. Like at Dr. Sue, thank you. Very, very special. You don't find that anywhere else. I also think he was on sabbatical at the time.
Wow, that's awesome.
It's great. It's really great. Yeah.
So you mentioned earlier that you were always an engineer at heart. Where did that passion for engineering come from? Was that something that you came into Elon knowing that's exactly what you wanted to do?
Mm. Thank you for asking that. So I've always known, I like science and math, it is how it is. If it's right, if it's wrong, and it makes sense. You make sense being able to see it. I started transitioning more over to physics than math at some point when things just became like a particle is moving along a line. I was like, okay, I care less about this. But being able to like understand how things function, especially when it comes to the human body too, the way that you move and seeing that, being able to, translate that to the way that you live your life is really cool to see. And you're able to actually like see it and feel it. And I always found it very special to be able to branch my academics with my athletics, so that's something that I've kind of been trying to capture, basically my whole academic career. But I had a bad experience in high school with physics. So I took AP physics, and my teacher at the time was kind of a bully. And he made me hate it. Oh, I hated that class so much. And it wasn't just because, it was bad teaching. It was just me no longer being confident in myself as a student and me thinking, I can't do this, because I wanted to be an engineer. And then I took AP Physics and I thought, I can't be an engineer because I don't know what's happening. And and there's no way I'm going to be able to catch up. And so I actually applied to all of my schools saying that I was going to be a bio major. And 2 weeks before classes started, like I got my schedule back from Elon with my bio curriculum. And I remember being upset that I didn't have a math class. And I thought, I think this is a sign. And so I called up Elon and I said, wait, can you change my schedule to be of the engineering curriculum? And I tried again and I took university physics and it was my favorite class. And I got for the first year in physics award. And Dr. Altman, who was my professor at the time, became my first mentor for a little project that I did that then escalated into my long-term thesis project. And so that's how that went. That's a fun story.
I'm curious to know how many freshman students immediately call the office saying, "Hey, I don't have a math class. I'm really upset. Can you put one in my schedule?" Like that must have been new for them.
Yeah, it's a bit different.
Well, moving into track and field specifically, when you look back at your Elon career with pole vaulting, and you also ran a little bit, is there
Mhm.
anything that is the most memorable or sticks out to you?
Any person in their right mind would say that my most memorable experience is one of our many CAA conference championships. And that's partially true, but it's not for, the reason you expect. My favorite moment, and I often think about this, was at my senior year conference championships after we won. I didn't compete well. I was upset with myself, but we were being handed the trophy and, they called out Elon and then everyone was, racing up to the trophy stand. And I was like lingering back, like they're happy, like let them have their time. Woohoo, go Elon. And at some point, like everyone just stopped and they just looked behind them and it was like the they were parting the Red Sea, and everyone was looking at me and I was like, what? And they said, go get the trophy, captain. And I'm getting emotional. Because I didn't compete that well. I didn't get as many points as I was expected to get. There are a lot of there are a lot of people on the team who got very substantial points and competed their hearts out in multiple events, and that was very special to me, just like knowing that, they seeing the way that they saw me and knowing that the way that I, had hoped to lead the team and set an example, had some sort of impact. So that was very special. I still think about that.
That's a very cool moment. And while you're getting accolades on the track and field, you're also an honors fellow. You're also doing research. You're also doing
Mm,
bioengineering. And you, as you mentioned before, kind of wove the two passions together into your
mhm,
undergraduate thesis. And I was just reading a little bit. It is very interesting how it came together. And I, as someone who doesn't know as much about pole vaulting, did not know that this was an issue. So
yeah.
if you could kind of explain it, and I'll ask you some more about it, but it's really cool.
Thank you. I mean, it's not just pole vault, it's across all sports. Sport specific shoes don't come in women's sizes. It's just all unisex, which means that they make it with a men's last and then they just grade it down to a smaller size range. But women and men have different shaped feet, and this is prevalent in the foot injuries in female athletics. It's something that, even us as female athletes, like we don't really recognize it. We say it's a shoe, it's a unisex shoe. So what? It's a unisex shoe. But we don't stop and think like, okay, who is it actually based off of? And it was also just remarkable finding out, through this experience in research and reaching out to people in the footwear industry, learning that even when you make sports equipment, when you make shoes, very little research is actually put in place before the shoe is actually made. It's based off of feedback. They make a shoe and then they say, how do you feel in it? Which, is somewhat of a robust metric to go off of because you want to hear what other people, think about your product. But I thought that we could be a little bit more proactive about that. And, just the way that you feel in a shoe doesn't mean that that has any indication of the way that you're going to perform in the shoe or your injury risk related to the structure of the shoe. So I decided to, look at the actual kinetics of women pole vaulters as they pole vaulted to see if I can make a shoe that's specifically conducive to the way that they move and the way that they apply force. And some things that I found were really cool. I got to see that when you look at a pole vaulting shoe as opposed to a sprinting spike. Sprint spikes are supposed to be as tight fitting and lightweight as possible. They have no heel because you're always supposed to be on your toes. And a pole vaulting spike has a heel. It looks kind of more like a shoe, like a regular shoe. But when you actually look at the numbers, throughout the entire approach, I think I saw that less than 6% of their total average force gets exerted through the heel. So it might not be necessary, things like that. But up until the penultimate step in the takeoff step when they use their heels. So at that point, I thought, well, we can't have a heel, but just utilize it in a different way. And so what I did was insert a lattice structure into the heel of the shoe to promote vertical propulsion. Because at that point during the penultimate and the last step, they're trying to get as vertical as possible. They're trying to jump upwards. And, there are shoes out there that are 3D printed with lattice structures with, paired between Adidas and carbon 3D printing that have lattice structures embedded in the midsole to promote forward propulsion. But I just chose a different lattice structure that promotes vertical propulsion for that. So, some interesting findings from that were really cool, and also just being introduced to actual field research was a lot of fun. And, my mentors were absolutely amazing and very supportive. I had a mentor that was kind of my cheerleader, Dr. Walter, who's in materials engineering. He was my primary mentor in engineering, and he was always like, Madison, this is great. You're doing amazing things. He would give me back drafts with like no edits. Or like, you're doing amazing things. You're amazing. I love it. And then my mentor in physical therapy education, Dr. Shafali Christopher. Oh, she's such a superwoman. Such a superwoman. She's a PT for the U.S. Paralympic triathlon team. She does it all. But she was the one that would send all my stuff back all read and give me a lot of constructive feedback and tell me, you can push yourself, you can do this, and we're going to figure this out, and let's set some real, big goals, which is fabulous, because I have I have one, some days you need a cheerleader and some days you need someone to like kick your butt a little bit.
I feel like that's so true with everything. Like even coaches, you need
Oh
the
yeah.
coach that's going to be on you, and you need the coach that's going to lift you up.
Yeah, and you just need a coach who knows the way that you respond. I was actually just in a conversation with someone about that, because I used to be a soccer coach, I used to be a pole vault coach, and you really have to understand the way that people take information and the ways in which they will start to block you out. My coach at home in Arizona, he is a very, very tough coach. He's famous for making Olympians cry. But he has never once yelled at me because he knows that I don't respond to that. If I would just shut down. Instead, he says, I thought you were better than that. He gets under your skin that way. I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, oh man. Or he'll just give you a look and won't say anything. You're like, I gotta fix myself. Yeah, you have to have those people who like understand you at a deeper level and are willing to understand you in that way. Other places, if you're put into a giant lecture hall in classes or anything, you're just you're being spoken to. Whereas at Elon, the classes are very small. They cap them at like 31 or whatever, very open office hours, and they get to know you as students and they get to like see the way that you're progressing. If you don't understand something, they'll go back, which is something that's very specific and special to Elon. Something that I miss. I miss.
And when talking about just pole vaulting in general, how much of it I have to think is just like little tweaks and little things. So
Mm.
something like a shoe is of vital importance because it can mean the difference between an
Mhm.
inch or a centimeter or
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, little things do make a difference. I mean, especially when it comes to, you're holding this big pole and it's not necessarily light. So anything that kind of like throws off your center of mass or like makes you feel a little bit different, the actual effect that you feel is much bigger. If your strides are a little bit too long, you're getting closer to the box, you feel these things a little bit more. And so that's why every single time you vault, you have to be very consistent, which means everything you do, you have to be doing at 100% effort every single time. If you do something less than 100%, you die. So yeah, little things like that, like tweaks and equipment and everything. Everyone has their very specific things. I know someone who has one specific like brand, model, and make of shoe that he has been wearing since he's been in high school, and he's now well out of college. But he keeps, finding old pairs of them because they are no longer made, but that's the shoe that he likes. And so he continues to just like find them. Very specific things. People have very specific things that they've adjusted to themselves. And that consistency definitely makes it a difference.
flipping back to research, talking about designing an entire shoe. First off, I want to ask because I saw it in an article, is it true that you had to order your own shoes from overseas because you couldn't find the shoes here?
That's correct. Yeah. It took over a month to get here. And then they were a little bit big, but that's fine. I'm not going to order them again. Yeah, it was pretty ridiculous. And I have average size feet for women.
Looking at the process of researching and designing a shoe, where does that even start? Where does one say, okay, I'm going to design a pole vaulting shoe? What's step number one?
If I knew, I'd tell you. I started everywhere. I started talking to a lot of people. And by a lot of people, I mean people in and out of the shoe industry. I spoke to someone made who made equestrian underwear, who traveled the world finding specific materials for equestrian underwear to learn about materials. Things like this. Every conversation is valuable. Every single conversation is valuable, and my mentor is experienced with materials engineering, but material feel and material behavior, I guess, is a whole thing in itself. I spoke to some representatives from Nike, research principal researcher of Nike and the principal researcher of biomechanics at Nike. Very valuable conversations. And laying out the actual study procedure takes a while, and then submitting an IRB, which takes a while to make and then to get reviewed. I was lucky that at Elon it was a quicker process than other places. And because my mentor was right across the hall from the person who reviews them, she just knocked on their door. Yeah, laying out the whole procedure, having all the equipment, making sure you know what you're doing, and also getting the equipment to various places. I shipped some of the equipment. I packed stuff with me as I flew back to Arizona to get some data on my teammates in Arizona as well. So, that's just a heck of a process, but actually designing the shoe was very, very tricky. I had to get a very expensive shoe modeling platform. I had to get a new laptop for it with specific specs. And then go through training for this specific footwear modeling platform because it's very complicated. But I had experienced 3D modeling through, some classes at Elon, but also I had an internship redesigning a sensor embedded insert, which was, very valuable for for this context. Um, but actually 3D printing the shoe was the most frustrating process because I had very little help when it came to that. We had a few printers that didn't print the things that I wanted them to print. And then it was just me just messing around with things and also messing around with the 3D scanner as well because I had a last that I wanted to base my shoe around and getting that thing to calibrate was just the most ridiculous. The amount of days worth of hours that I spent on these 3D scanners and 3D printers is absolutely bonkers. Research takes a lot longer than you think every single time. It's never going to go the way that you expect it will.
Eventually, were you able to figure it out and get the 3D model that you wanted for your shoe?
I made a 3D model. I have that CAD file. I printed layers. They were not assembled, but in CAD, it's just, if I had been here, right across the road from carbon 3D printing, I would have had that thing printed lickety split, you know. And I still could because I have the CAD file, so it's there and the model is there and the data is there. So that was exciting to have it laid out in front of you as I defended that thesis, to actually have some tangible work. Yeah, it's nice to have something there.
That's great. Well, defending your thesis is one of many accolades that you got just while you were here at Elon. It would take a really long time to list them all off with the scholarships and everything. Is out of all your different accolades, is there any one of them that is your proudest accomplishment out of all of those?
When I was named the CAA Female Student Athlete, Scholar Athlete of the Year, that was a pretty big one. But also something that I didn't have to apply for it or anything. I sent my CV to Elon Athletics and they kind of did it for me. So I feel like that was Elon fighting for me.
Mhm.
I feel like it's not necessarily anything I did, but it's just the way that, the university
Mhm.
supported me because it's not like I wrote anything about it, like, oh, I deserve this because this, and this.
Mhm.
I gave them my CV and then Elon fought for me. So that was a really cool one because that spanned like 13 different schools. And I was like, I made shoes and and you think I'm cool? Thanks. But one thing that was really cool, and I still have it in my room, was that President Book is the best. I love her so much. She's such an inviting person. And we've had very lovely conversations. She's always happy to talk to students, which I really appreciate. And at one point, she said that she wanted me to have, a featured like article within the President's Report, like the 2022 to 2023 President's Report or something. And I was like, okay, great, yeah, for sure. And so I spoke to some people about it, told them my story, and then they said, okay, we're gonna have a little photo shoot for your article. And I was like, okay, cool. And so, they took some pictures of me. And then when the President's Report came out, the cover was my face. And that was definitely one of my proudest moments. That and President Book called me on my birthday once.
Wow. You got birthday wishes from President
I
Book?
got birthday wishes, yes.
I, that's a pretty good accolade.
She's the best. She's great. I have many great things to say about her.
You eventually moved on from Elon back to the West Coast to Stanford. Before we get into what you're doing there, what was that decision-making process like, having to think about next steps and where to go in terms of continuing your research and continuing your
Mhm.
academic career?
I mean, it was, so many emotions. I was very conflicted. I was very stressed and I was very excited and I was blown away and I had serious imposter syndrome. So I applied to, and I don't know why I felt safe doing this. I applied to Stanford, Duke, Yale, and the NIH Oxford Cambridge Scholars Program. And that's it. And I always thought, Duke is my safety because I know people from there and I've established relationships with people there. And at Duke, it's basically direct admission into a lab. And I had established a connection with a lab. So basically, like as long as you meet a threshold and a lab wants you, you get it. And that lab has funding for you, you get it. And so I was like, okay, well, Duke is always there. And then I mean, Stanford has always been a dream school. It's always been that reach school. And I knew that I had a really great bioengineering program. And, one of my professors, Dr. Su, he got his master's at Stanford, had really great things to say. And they have a really well-known, biomechanics group and funding from the WUSI Human Performance Alliance, which funds a lot of human performance research, which is very hard to find elsewhere. Because other places, if you go through the NIH or NSF or anything, they want to fund research that's for like human disease or cancer, stuff like that. Not necessarily like, oh, you want people to perform better. You want people to not get injured. I mean, we're trying to cure cancer, and you're looking at people's feet. So I knew Stanford was on there as it was a reach, and then I was applying for a fellowship. I was applying for like a lot of, fellowships. And one of them required that I apply to three of their member institutions. And Duke was one, Stanford was one. And so I had to find another. And so that's why I applied to Yale, because their application was short. I was like, oh, maybe I'll apply to Johns Hopkins, but that application was longer. So I was like, no, I'll apply to Yale. But just simply because I needed to apply to one more for that fellowship. And then Elon really wanted me to apply for the Rhodes Scholarship, but that didn't include any discipline that I was very invested in. I mean, the closest thing would have been electrical engineering, and I'm not an electrical engineer. So I was like, I don't think that's for me. So they said, okay, well, there's this other thing that you could apply to, and they have like a biosciences, which is the NIH Oxford Cambridge Scholars Program. So I was like, okay, let's do it. And it's an accelerated 4-year program where you spend 2 years at the NIH in Bethesda, Maryland, and 2 years at either Oxford or Cambridge, depending on where you find a lab that suits you. And then you get a DPhil, which is the same as a PhD, but from Oxford or Cambridge, in just 4 years. And I don't understand how I was ever accepted to that program, because I applied with a project with the idea of a project that used MRI and musculoskeletal models to make, patient-specific, like injury models. And I remember specifically at one point during that interview, the hardest interview I've ever had, you have several people from Oxford and Cambridge and the NIH pestering you over Zoom. And one of the first question, she said, I don't understand. What is your MRI experience? And I said, I read a textbook. I said, and it's entirely true. It's entirely true. I have no MRI experience, but I bought a textbook and started reading it because I was like, this is interesting. Because, prior I had issues with inaccurate medical imaging that caused me to get open surgery just to simply diagnose a problem. And I was like, I think we can do better than this. And so I applied to all these programs saying that I was going to do this like overlapping of dynamic MRI and musculoskeletal models with no experience in this area at all. Again, I made shoes in undergrad, and I applied to these programs with this idea that I had never touched on. And somehow I got into that program. And so I got into all the programs, which is ridiculous to me. Absolutely ridiculous. I guess I'm good at interviews or something. I don't know. And I was thinking, what did I put in these applications that made me seem like I could do this? But having those options made it very hard. It would have been really special to do the Oxford Cambridge Scholars Program, but it was also an accelerated program, and it would be difficult, to uproot go somewhere for 2 years, upward again, go somewhere for 2 years, especially because I need time to learn the foundations of these things. So eventually that one was just not in the stars, but always deep down, I was very excited about Stanford. And I went on, the visit days. And when I talked to other people, I would always say, what do you do outside of lab? And everyone here says, oh, I go mountain biking, I go hiking, I surf, all these outdoorsy things. And they knew immediately, they didn't have to think about it. They knew who they are out of lab. And not gonna lie, when I was talking to people at Duke, in Durham, I would be like, what do you do outside of lab? And they say, we go to the pub. And it would take them a second, like you should know who you are outside of your research. And, that was a good indication that Stanford was where I belonged. And I'm very, very happy with my decision. I mean, I can't even tell you the emotions that I feel when I bike here. So I bike across campus to get to lab. And still, every single morning as I pass through the road that goes between the oval and the main quad, I look right down the oval and down Palm Drive, and then I look left through the main quad at the famous Stanford Cathedral, and I think, okay, wow. Every single morning.
It's a little different than South Williamson or um,
Oh, but
O'Kelly.
I Oh, but I miss Elon's campus. I really do. Rolling hills and the ponds and the trees that change color. And also, I always complained about Elon parking, but you know what? It's not that bad.
In comparison.
In comparison, yeah. This campus is a beast, man. It's huge.
Yeah, well, now you're at Stanford, aiming for your
Mhm.
PhD. Explain kind of what you're doing there, what your
Mhm.
research is, and how that has expanded from your time here at Elon.
Oh boy, it's been such a journey already. It's crazy. It's been a year. It's been a year. I started out with 3 rotations, So another special thing about the Stanford program is that you're not directly admitted to a lab. You don't put all your eggs in one basket. They want you to do rotations to feel out the labs and make sure that's a proper fit for you. Because even though, they might do research that interests you, but the environment might not be a good fit for you. And then if you, decide on a lab before you understand, the working environment, and then you realize that it's not for you, then it can be a little sticky. And I did do 3 full rotations. So I first rotated in an MRI lab with Felix Kogan. Um, and it was really crazy going into a space where you like, absolutely nothing. Coming from a place where you were like, the top dog and people were parading you, exaggerating, fully exaggerating. But going to, a space where you have no experience in and you're trying to learn, it just makes you feel very different. Oh man, it was a little bit tough. And then like you take classes that are challenging, which is good. You should always be challenged, but very challenging. Um, and so, I learned process of, acquiring images at the scanner. They trusted me to be behind the scanner, which was pretty crazy. Um, yeah, that was a lot of fun. It was fun. And then in the winter, I rotated in a neuromuscular biomechanics lab with Scott Delp, and he is the top person in all human biomechanics in the world. It's crazy. He wrote the textbook, and he's the director of everything. And it's so hard to get on his schedule. He's one of those, you know, legends. And then I was kind of back in a comfortable space, because I, was kind of I had a biomechanics background. That's where I was, it's very much like sport performance, injury prevention, and that's where the mindset is in that entire lab. So that was more comfortable getting into, but then I took his biomechanics class, and oh, tough. Tough. But it was such a crazy year. I did a lot of things. I actually last year at the very beginning of the year. So second week of classes. So I had actually I still had eligibility, like athletic eligibility for grad school. And in the early spring of my senior year at Elon, I was already chatting with the Stanford coach. He was like, "Yeah, your heights are good. We're good." And then the second week of class here at Stanford, I got hit by a car while biking on campus. And that process of, trying to get back into it, trying to get back into shape, and, just like fighting for that dream of like wearing the Stanford jersey, it, it was tough. It was really tough. And, you know, everything was just, a cascade of dominoes, because one thing hurt and then one thing hurt and then as I was getting better something else hurt, and then I would overcompensate. I had a really deep contusion in my calf and bone was building up in my calf, and so then I pulled my left quad and then I pulled my right hamstring, just trying to get back into things, and then realizing injuries I hadn't even like known were there because they were very deep injuries that didn't surface until later. And having to go through that, it was just kind of exhausting. And also being in a PhD program, it was just a lot stacked on top of each other. And then, I started branching off and doing other things that I wanted to do instead of felt like I had to do, and kind of established a life balance that I never knew I needed. And realized that there are other things that would make me happier than competing and establishing my identity and my self-worth based on how I jumped that day, and spending my entire weekends at a track meet and then having to, figure everything out and balance everything and not having any sort of social life, because my entire life everything was like first half of the day was academics, second half of the day was athletics, and I went to bed. And that was every single day. I never went out. I didn't do anything. I was a lame person, but that's how my life was and that's how I wanted it to be. But then I, established these other things I would rather do. And now I move to be happy, and I don't move to, get a mark. And, I go hiking on every single weekend. I take at least one day where my laptop is down and I just do whatever. And I find somewhere new and beautiful to go for a hike and just be outside. I've learned how to social dance. I picked up waltz, and I tried some swing, but I'm bad at swing. Bachata. Last week I learned how to tango. I went to a big ball, where all of this dancing, I learned how to ski, downhill skiing and cross country skiing. Went to Tahoe a couple times with my different labs, we've gone to some Broadway performances. I went on a road trip by myself in the spring, when Pac-12 championships would have happened. So I wouldn't have been able to do that. Did like 4 hikes in 4 days all the way down, then came back up. I went skydiving, which I never would have done if I were in athletics, because there are all these, like, I could never do anything because of fear of, missing practice or being tired or being sore or being fatigued or hurting yourself. I could never do all these things, so, and I fool around the gymnastics gym sometimes, I just, again, I move to be happy. And if I've gone a day where I was moving and I was happy about it, that's a win, it's not like, oh, I didn't jump that well today, like my mark it wasn't that great. My time wasn't that great, and that's my self-worth, I feel a much better sense of balance now, So life has changed very dramatically. And a year ago, 2 days ago, was when I was hit by the car. So I stayed at home that day. A couple days ago, I was like, yeah, I think I'm just gonna wrap myself in bubble wrap today and just stay in. But yeah, then I did a spring rotation in ultrasound lab, learned elastography ultrasound. And then at the end of all of those, I had a really hard time making a decision. And so I decided to not make a decision. So I chose all of them in some aspect. So Felix in MRI, he's my primary advisor, and he's the best. He's the absolute best. I can just slack help, and then you know, and I'm learning so much. It's a really beautiful thing. I'm learning something every single day. I'm working the scanner on my own, which is a whole lot of fun. Starting my own project, getting into the weeds of it. My secondary advisor is Scott Delp in neuromuscular biomechanics, and Jeremy Dahl in ultrasound is a collaborator on my project. I was speaking with a very well-known like sports medicine, orthopedic surgery. I don't even know. He has so many titles. He has so many titles. He is in the top like 1% of people cited, you know. But yeah, he works with, Stanford athletics and everything. He's in orthopedic surgery and yeah. And I was asking him about this idea that I had using diffusion-based MRI to track muscle injury progression and look at sex differences in these metrics because men and women have different shaped fibers and everything. And I thought this should be, sex specific if we're going to be looking at these metrics. And he said, yeah, I see merit in this, but also it would be really cool if you applied this to something called exertional compartment syndrome, which is a condition where you get a whole lot of built up pressure within a muscle compartment, which is a few muscles encapsulated within the same fascia. And we don't really know why all this pressure accumulates, but for some reason, all this pressure accumulates and it's debilitating. It's very, very painful. And it occurs in active populations. So maybe, over time, the fascia thickens or something happens. And all of a sudden, when they exercise, blood pools into the muscles. And for some reason, like so much pressure builds up and you can't do anything about it. You just have to wait for it to go away. But it occurs whenever you exercise. And you can do some PT, some stretching, rework your biomechanics to stress that muscle group less, or you can retire from your sport. You can get a different job, or if you're in the military, transition to something that's less active. Or you can get a fasciotomy, which is a surgical procedure where they just go in and cut through the fascia and release the pressure manually. But the problem is the only way to diagnose exertional compartment syndrome is by sticking a pressure needle into your muscle, like a turkey, Very, very painful and invasive. So invasive that the only person at Stanford that does this procedure is Dr. Fredrickson, who's the clinician on my team. And I thought, wow, that is an issue. That is an issue. So I said, yeah, I'll look into that. So my current project is using a few types of imaging, including diffusion tensor imaging or DTI MRI, intravoxel incoherent motion imaging or IVIM MRI, which looks at perfusion. So I'm looking at diffusion and perfusion with MRI, T2 mapping MRI, which accounts for fluid accumulation, change in fluid quantity, and elastography ultrasound, which measures stiffness. And I am going to, get patients with suspected exertional compartment syndrome and healthy controls and image them before and after exercise and see if these can be non-invasive biomarkers of this condition, because no one wants a pressure needle inserted into their muscle. It's painful. So that's where we're going right now. And it's very, very exciting. I had my first exercise participant just a couple weeks ago, and I'm looking at that information. I'm going to have another one this week. It took a long time to narrow down the parameters and to test all the parameters. I scanned a bunch of people just at rest to make sure that what I'm getting is what I want to be getting, because I also want to have a lot of time points after exercise to get a temporal view. And so I'm trying to reduce scan times as much as possible while maintaining robustness of the parameters and of, the quantitative metrics that you're getting. So there's a lot of me, messing around with different metrics and just, working the scanner and everything, getting comfortable with that. And yeah, I had my first exercise participant just a little bit ago, and it's exciting, actually looking at things. It's very exciting. Yeah.
Someone Googles your name, what comes up is, all the accolades and the pole vaulting and
Oh
creating a
boy.
shoe and the research, right? But it's really cool to hear, the story of the accident and how you've transformed over the last year into
Hmm.
going down this path that's pretty similar, but it's different. And
Hmm.
it's really cool that you've been able to do all these different things. I guess my question is when someone looks at the accolades from the outside or sees what you're doing, what do you want their takeaways to be about what you've been able to accomplish and how you've grown over the last couple of years?
I would want people to know, oh, she works hard, you know?
Hmm.
Because it's not easy, we all try our best. We all do our best, and that's all you can do, you know? And so, if you're looking just like at my things, at my resume, not just like, oh, you did this and that, but like, oh, there's some work there, And it was really crazy having to rework my identity as well. Because now, I don't think about those things as much. I don't think about being a scholar athlete or VP of the Student Athlete Advisory Council, although, all of those were really great things. I had to really, redefine who I am and be okay with whatever I become, because a lot of, a pretty major topic of discussion that I think should be talked about more is understanding the difficulty with redefining your identity after you part ways with your sport, and when, retired Olympians, there are no resources helping them move forward, especially when it comes to people who retire so early, like, gymnasts, they have to find out how to get a job unless they're sponsored by someone or an Instagram influencer, and then you have to be okay with the transition and seeing yourself for like in a different space, because my entire life, half of my identity was athletics. And then I was like, okay, well, if I'm not like a competitive athlete anymore, all of a sudden my self-worth has plummeted, And then, when I work out and I'm like, oh, I'm not as fast as I was before, this is harder than it was before. I'm not as poppy, I'm not as strong, just being okay with knowing that strong and healthy are beautiful no matter what they look like. And that being happy is beautiful no matter what it looks like, And I have other friends as well, kind of like going through the same thing, right at this moment, people who have, like me, the same amount of eligibility and are now transitioning now that they don't have an eligibility anymore. And there are no resources helping them, You just have to redefine who you are and realize that as you move forward, there are there are still places to go. You haven't reached your peak and then everything is going to go downhill from there, it was very difficult and it took a very long time for me to make peace with that. But, just again, recognizing that happy, healthy, and strong are beautiful no matter what they look like.
Well, that's a hype up speech. I'm I'll take that.
Oh man.
Well, it's
It's
interesting
going down
because
rabbit holes.
no, it's because we've had Isabel Seaman who played volleyball here, medically retired, had to
Mhm.
figure out what she was doing after that. Same thing with a lot of the different guests we've had. So it seems to be a running theme of like redefining yourself after athletics is done. So it's very cool to see that thread through all our
Mhm.
different episodes. But I want to
Mhm.
ask,
Mhm.
and I feel like it would be wrong of me. I will still ask, but it'd be wrong of me to just ask you what your goals are regarding academics. I also want to know what new dances are you going to go learn? Where are you going to go hike next? Now I feel like
Oh
those are
man.
as just as important as your academic goals, but I assume eventually Dr. George is going to be listed
Uh,
somewhere.
crazy. Yeah, I mean, the academic goals are to make a difference, I feel like a lot of research can be done for the sake of research, but my research has, high impact focus, what I do in my research, I want to impact people's lives. And I think one of the easiest ways to do that, or not the easiest, but one of the most direct ways to do that is through medical diagnostics. Because again, I had a sports related injury that wasn't picked up by any sort of medical imaging. So I had to get open surgery. They cut me open just to simply diagnose the problem and figure out what to do about it. Yeah, moving forward, I want to implement something that can at some point somehow improve someone's lives or, make things a little bit easier. I had an Elon teammate actually who had bilateral compartment syndrome in her lower legs. And she went through the diagnostic process of getting the pressure measurement. So if I can, figure out how to, improve that, improve people's lives, then that would be really great. Where I'm hiking next, I mean, next weekend, the day before, I'll look up somewhere on All Trails and be like, "Yep, that's it. That's where I'm going." Whether it's like 2 hours away or just like down the road, we'll find out. But I would like to do a road trip back home for Thanksgiving break. I was actually just sorting that out yesterday. I might hit Death Valley and the Grand Canyon on the way down, and then maybe Joshua Tree and Sequoia on the way up, but that would be a heck of a lot. But, we'll see about that. But it's fun being able to do that. I can do whatever I want, and I'll tell my parents about it after. Same with skydiving. They heard about it after.
Ask for forgiveness, not permission.
Absolutely.
Well, Madison, thank you so much for sitting down and having this conversation. I learned
Thank
a
you.
lot as a sport management major and journalism major about engineering and all those different things. So I really appreciate it. Your story was amazing, and I'm glad that you were able to share it.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Yeah, feel free to reach out at any time.
If you have not already, make sure to subscribe, follow, and like wherever you get your podcast. We now have over a dozen hours of conversations with Elon alumni, athletes, and staff for you to listen to and enjoy. If you're an Elon athlete, coach, or alumni interested in being featured on a future episode of the podcast, contact Chase Strasser at cstrasser@elon.edu. That's CSTRAWSER@elon.edu. Make sure to follow us on all of our social media channels. We're on X at EU Rising Phoenix and on Instagram at Elon Rising Phoenix. We're also on TikTok at Elon Rising Phoenix. New articles, graphics, and other content can be found on these platforms. Finally, new episodes will be arriving every other Wednesday. Check back in occasionally for a brand new episode with an exciting guest. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Rising Phoenix podcast.